Imagine this. You own a quiet ranch, a peaceful piece of land where you spent years building memories, working hard, and just enjoying the simple life. This place is your sanctuary, your escape from the noise and rush of the world. You expect to be left alone, to have your privacy respected. But then, day after day, someone keeps showing up uninvited, parking right on your property like it says. And not just anyone. This is a person with some kind of authority, someone who should know better. That's exactly what happened to Grandpa and his family on their ranch. An HOA cop, yes, an officer working for the Homeowners Association, started parking his vehicle on their land without permission. No knocks, no warnings, just showing up and taking a spot like it was his right. It wasn't a one-time thing either. It kept happening again and again. At first, they thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the officer got confused about where the property lines were. But when it didn't stop, frustration grew. You might be wondering, why would an HOA cop park on private property? Well, sometimes these officers are hired to patrol neighborhoods, enforce rules, or keep an eye on things. But this one crossed a line, literally, by stepping onto land that didn't belong to him. It's like someone barging into your backyard and dropping their things there, with no care for how you feel. It's an invasion, and it's disrespectful. Grandpa had seen a lot in his time. He's the kind of man who knows the value of land, and is not about to let someone walk all over him. This ranch wasn't just dirt and trees. It was a piece of his family's heart, built with sweat and patience. And this wasn't just about parking a car. It was about respect, about boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Day after day, the truck would show up, parked where it didn't belong. Sometimes it was early morning, other times late afternoon. Sometimes it stayed for hours, sometimes just long enough to send a message. It was clear the HOA cop wasn't going to stop unless something changed. The family talked about it. They debated what to do. Should they call the HOA office and complain? Should they call the police? Would that even work? Sometimes, rules on paper don't mean much when it comes to what actually happens in real life. And they worried that the officer might just ignore any polite request to leave. Grandpa had a different idea. He's not one to wait around for others to fix things when he can handle it himself. After all, this was his land, his family's land. And if someone was going to treat it like a free parking lot, he'd have to make sure they knew it wasn't acceptable. Now, you might think this story is about some kind of showdown, a big fight or dramatic argument. But it's not like that. It's about something deeper. It's about standing up for what's yours, about protecting what matters, and about making sure respect is earned, not demanded. You can probably imagine the tension growing. Every time that truck appeared, there was a mix of anger, disbelief, and determination. Grandpa watched it carefully. He noticed the patterns, when the truck arrived, where it was parked exactly, how long it stayed. And then he planned something unexpected. Something that would stop the situation once and for all, but in a way only Grandpa could do. This wasn't about making noise or creating drama. It was about sending a clear message. Sometimes words aren't enough. Sometimes you need to act in a way that can't be ignored. And Grandpa had just a plan. It involved his old truck, the creek that ran through property, and a quiet, steady kind of courage. What happened next would surprise many. It's a kind of story that spreads fast in small towns and tight-knit communities. It's a story about a man protecting his home in a way that makes people sit up and take notice. It's about how sometimes the best way to handle an ongoing problem is not with anger or complaints, but with action. This story isn't just about an HOA cop or ranch. It's about boundaries, about respect, about the length someone will go to defend what they love. And the way Grandpa handled it, well, it's something you don't see every day. It's a lesson in standing your ground, but done with a kind of old-school grit and wisdom. So, what exactly did Grandpa do? How did he use his truck and the creek to make sure the message was clear? What happened to the HOA cop after that? Stick around to hear the full story. It's not just entertaining. It's a reminder that sometimes protecting your peace means doing what others won't. The ranch itself was a beautiful place, the kind of land that seems to carry stories in every inch of soil and every breeze that rustled through the trees. It was Grandpa's domain, a spot where time felt slow and the world's troubles seemed to melt away. Years of hard work had gone into keeping it running, planting crops, fixing fences, feeding animals. It was more than just land. It was a way of life. Grandpa was a man who knew the value of patience and respect. He had lived through tough times and had a quiet strength about him. He wasn't quick to anger or rash decisions, but he was firm when it came to protecting what belonged to him and his family. That ranch wasn't just a piece of property. It was part of who he was. When the HOA cops started showing up and parking on the ranch, it felt like a violation. Not just a physical one, but a breach of trust. The cop was supposed to keep things orderly, but here he was crossing boundaries without permission. It was confusing at first. Maybe the cop thought the land was public or part of the HOA territory. But no, this was private land, and the signs were clear. Grandpa wasn't the only one who noticed. The whole family felt it. They could hear the truck's engine rumbling through the quiet, see the headlights cutting through the morning fog or the afternoon sun. It was a constant reminder that their privacy was being ignored. Every time the truck pulled in, it felt like a shadow falling over the ranch. They tried talking about it among themselves. Should they call the HOA? Maybe the cop didn't know the landlines properly. Maybe it was a mistake. But after a while, it didn't feel like a mistake anymore. It felt deliberate, a way to show control, to claim some sort of authority when none was due. Grandpa knew the value of clear communication, but he also knew sometimes words aren't enough. It was one thing to talk about respect. It was another to demand it with action. He remembered how his own father had handled tough situations with quiet but firm determination. There was a lesson in those memories. The ranch had a creek running through part of it, a slow-moving ribbon of water surrounded by mud and rocks. It wasn't a large creek, but it was deep enough to make crossing tricky, especially for a heavy vehicle. The creek was one of Grandpa's favorite spots, a place where he would sometimes sit for hours, watching the water flow and thinking about life. One day, after seeing the truck parked again right near the creek bank, Grandpa made a decision. He would use the creek and his truck to send a message that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't about making trouble or causing harm. It was about standing firm in a way that said, "This is my land. This is my home." Grandpa started planning carefully. He knew he had to be smart about it, or else things could get worse. But he also knew the land better than anyone. He knew where the soft spots were, where the creek was deep enough to make a statement. And he knew his old truck, how it handled rough terrain, and when to push it just enough. That morning, when the HOA cop truck showed up again, Grandpa was ready. Instead of confronting the officer head-on, he quietly moved his own truck toward the creek. The family watched with a mix of curiosity and nervousness. What was Grandpa doing? Was this going to cause a fight? Grandpa didn't rush. He eased the truck toward the creek, feeling the wheels sink into the soft earth. The truck was old but strong, built for the kind of work the ranch demanded. Slowly, the front tires dipped into the muddy creek bed, the water splashing gently against the sides. It was a careful maneuver, but it sent a clear message. The truck wasn't blocking the road or causing any damage. It was just there, half submerged in the creek, like a silent guardian of the ranch. And the location was no accident. It was right where the HOA cop had been parking repeatedly, a way of marking the territory without saying a word. The family could see the cop's truck still parked nearby, and soon enough, the officer noticed Grandpa's truck in the creek. At first, there was surprise, maybe confusion. Why would someone drag a truck into the water like that? But then the message became clear. It was a boundary, a line that shouldn't be crossed. Word started spreading through the neighborhood and nearby towns about what Grandpa had done. Some people thought it was clever, others thought it was bold, but no one ignored it. The story became something more than just about a parking problem. It became about standing up, taking action, and respecting other property. Meanwhile, the ranch stayed quiet again. The truck in the creek was a reminder that this land wasn't a free parking spot or a shortcut. It was someone's home, and it deserved respect. Grandpa's calm but firm approach showed that sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to make yourself heard. Through it all, Grandpa kept his cool. He didn't want to escalate the situation or cause unnecessary trouble. He just wanted peace. Peace on the ranch and peace in knowing that his family's land was safe. And the way he handled things, well, it was classic Grandpa, practical, strong, and full of quiet wisdom. That old truck in the creek, it wasn't just a vehicle stuck in the mud. It was a symbol of standing your ground, even when the odds seemed small. It was about protecting what's important with patience and courage. And it was a story that reminds us all how far someone will go to defend their home. The repeated visits from the HOA cop became a constant in their lives, impossible to ignore. Every time the truck pulled up, it felt like an invasion, even though no one said a word. The ranch had always been a place of peace, but now there was this tension hanging in the air, like an unspoken battle being waged on quiet ground. Grandpa watched closely, noticing every detail. The truck didn't just park anywhere. It settled in the same spot, right near the edge of the creek, as if marking its territory. It was almost like a silent challenge. This was where the cop thought he had the right to be, on someone else's land. That quiet parking spot became a symbol of disrespect, a daily reminder that boundaries were being crossed with no regard. The family started to talk more about what this all meant. They wondered why the HOA cop felt he could act this way. Was it arrogance? Was it a belief that rules didn't apply to him? Or maybe it was something more complicated. Power, control, or simply not caring about others. Whatever the reason, it was clear this wasn't just about parking. It was about authority being misused. Grandpa didn't like confrontation. He wasn't looking for trouble. But he did have a limit, and it was fast approaching. The repeated intrusion wasn't just annoying. It was threatening the peace and privacy that the family had worked so hard to protect. It was as if the cop's truck was a physical barrier between them and their quiet life. At first, they tried to be patient. They hoped the officer would realize the mistake and stop parking there. They thought maybe a polite conversation or a simple notice from the HOA would solve the problem. But nothing changed. The truck kept coming back, day after day, like a stubborn shadow refusing to leave. One afternoon, Grandpa sat on the porch, watching the truck settle in its usual spot. He thought about all the times he had been patient, all the times he had hoped things would get better without any drama. But now, patience wasn't enough. He knew something had to be done, and done soon. The family started to feel the weight of the situation. It wasn't just about property lines or parking spots anymore. It was about respect for their home, their space, and their way of life. And it was about making sure that respect was demanded, not just hoped for. Grandpa was no stranger to standing his ground. Over the years, he had faced challenges before, whether wild animals, tough neighbors, but this was different. This was a battle of wills, a test of boundaries that couldn't be settled with words alone. He had to find a way to send a message without escalating things into something dangerous. He thought back to stories he had heard from older generations about how they handled trespassers and disrespect in times past. They didn't always need to shout or fight. Sometimes, a quiet, strong action spoke louder than any argument. It was about making the other person think twice before stepping over the line again. That's when Grandpa's idea started to take shape. It wasn't a plan to cause chaos or harm. It was a way to use what he had, the land, the creek, his truck, to stand firm and show that the ranch wasn't a place to be taken lightly. It was a plan rooted in quiet strength, a message delivered without words but impossible to miss. The more he thought about it, the more confident he became. This wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about protecting a way of life. The truck parked on the ranch was a symbol of intrusion, but Grandpa's response would be a symbol of defense. It would show that respect comes with consequences. That day, as the sun moved low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Grandpa made his move. He backed his truck slowly toward the creek, feeling the earth soften beneath the tires. It was a careful, deliberate action, one that took patience and precision. The water rippled gently as the truck's wheels dipped into the muddy bank. The family watched in silence, knowing this was more than just a physical act. It was a stand. It was a way to reclaim their space, to show that their land wasn't a place for unwanted visitors to take liberties. The truck wasn't stuck. It was placed deliberately, thoughtfully, with intention. News of what happened began to spread quietly through the neighborhood. People whispered about the old rancher who used his truck in a creek to protect his land from an HOA cop who wouldn't listen. Some admired the quiet courage. Others were curious about what would happen next. But no one could deny that Grandpa had made his point clear. Meanwhile, the truck in the creek became a reminder every time the HOA cop thought about parking there again. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a boundary marker, a silent warning that this land was watched and protected. The peaceful ranch had found its defender, and the message was unmistakable. Grandpa didn't need to say a word to the officer. The action spoke for itself. Sometimes, when words fail, actions carry the weight. And in this quiet, muddy creek, that message was louder than ever. Grandpa's decision to drag his truck into the creek wasn't impulsive. It was a result of days, maybe even weeks, of frustration and careful thought. He understood that sometimes the best way to make someone listen wasn't by shouting or arguing. It was by making a statement so clear that it couldn't be ignored. That morning, the ranch was calm as ever, the kind of stillness that feels almost sacred. Birds chirped softly, the wind whispered through the trees, and the creek meandered quietly, reflecting the early sunlight. But beneath this peaceful surface, something was about to change. Grandpa started his old truck, its engine rumbling to life with that familiar growl. It wasn't the newest or flashiest vehicle, but it was tough and reliable, just like him. He pulled it slowly toward the edge of the creek, wheels crunching on the gravel and dirt. The family watched silently, sensing that this was more than just a simple drive. With careful precision, Grandpa eased the truck down into the creek bed. The front tires sank into the muddy water, and the truck's frame lowered gently into the cool creek. The water lapped around the tires, sparkling in the sunlight as it flowed downstream. It was a striking image, an old truck half submerged in the middle of the ranch, a quiet statement carved out of determination and grit. No one said a word, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't about blocking a road or causing damage. It was a message about respect, about boundaries, about standing up for what's yours without causing harm. The truck wasn't stuck. It was deliberately positioned to mark a line the HOA cops shouldn't cross again. The news traveled fast. The neighbors who had heard about the ongoing problem were surprised but impressed by Grandpa's calm and clever response. Instead of a fight or a confrontation, he had chosen a solution that was simple, effective, and unforgettable. It was a reminder that sometimes actions speak louder than words, and that standing your ground can come in unexpected forms. Meanwhile, the HOA cops truck remained parked nearby, but the tone had shifted. The silent presence of Grandpa's truck in the creek changed everything. It was as if the land itself was taking a stand, backed by a man who understood its value and wasn't afraid to protect it. The cops' visits started to dwindle. The parking stops became less frequent until they stopped altogether. The message had been delivered loud and clear, without a single word exchanged. Grandpa's quiet strength had won the day. The family felt a new kind of peace settle over the ranch. The old rhythms returned, the sound of animals in the fields, the rustle of leaves, the gentle flow of the creek. But now, there was a deeper sense of security, a feeling that their home was safe and respected. Grandpa didn't need thanks or praise. For him, it was about doing what was right, protecting his land and his family's way of life. The truck in the creek was more than just a tool. It was a symbol of that commitment, a reminder that respect is to be owned and defended. Stories like this spread through small communities quickly. Some people chuckled at the unusual sight of a truck in a creek. Others nodded in understanding, recognizing the quiet power behind the act. And some, especially those who faced similar struggles, felt inspired by Grandpa's example. It's a story about more than just parking or property lines. It's about boundaries, respect, and the length someone will go to protect what matters most. It's about the quiet courage it takes to stand up for yourself in a world that doesn't always play fair. And for Grandpa, it was just another day on the ranch, a place where actions speak louder than words, where respect is shown in deeds, and where peace is earned through strength and wisdom. After that day, things around the ranch slowly began to shift. The tension that had been hanging over the family like a dark cloud started to lift. Grandpa's truck sitting quietly in the creek wasn't just a symbol. It was a boundary, a line in the sand that no one dared cross anymore. The HOA cop who had been parking without permission didn't return to the same spot. It was as if the message had been delivered and understood, without a single argument or harsh word. The family found themselves breathing easier. There was a calmness to the air that hadn't been there before, like the land itself was relieved. It's strange how such a simple action, just parking a truck in the creek, could change everything. But that's the power of standing up for what you believe in, even in quiet, unexpected ways. Grandpa didn't boast about what he had done. In fact, he acted like nothing had changed. He went about his daily routine as usual, tending to the ranch with the same steady hands and calm spirit. But those who knew him understood what that moment in the creek meant. It was a reminder that sometimes respect is something you have to claim, not just expect. Neighbors started talking. Word spread about the old rancher who had found a clever way to protect his land. Some were impressed by his quiet confidence. Others saw it as a lesson, a way to handle a frustrating problem without escalating it. The story became part of the community's local lore, told and retold at gatherings and over coffee. But more than the story itself, it was a feeling behind it that resonated. It was the idea that no matter how small or quiet you might seem, you have the power to defend what's yours. You don't always need to fight loudly or make a scene. Sometimes, all it takes is a little creativity and a whole lot of courage. For the family, life on the ranch settled back into its peaceful rhythm. The animals roamed freely, the crops grew tall, and the creek continued its gentle flow. But beneath that calm surface, there was a renewed sense of safety, a knowledge that their home was protected by someone who wouldn't back down. Grandpa's action was a reminder that standing your ground isn't about aggression or conflict. It's about knowing your worth and showing it through your actions. It's about setting boundaries that others learn to respect, even if they don't say it out loud. The HOA cop never returned to park on the ranch again, but the truck in the creek remained for a while longer. It was a quiet guardian, watching over the land and reminding everyone who passed by that this place was protected. Eventually, the truck was moved, but the story stayed, a testament to the power of quiet resolve. Sometimes, the simplest solutions are the most effective. Grandpa's story shows that when faced with disrespect or disregard, standing firm doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to involve loud confrontations or legal battles. It can be a calm, confident action that speaks volumes. And in the end, that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about a truck in a creek or a parking dispute. It's about respect, boundaries, and the strength it takes to protect what matters most. It's about the courage to stand up in your own way and the peace that comes from knowing you did. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch slowly returned to its natural rhythm. The usual sounds of birds, rustling leaves, and distant animal calls filled the air again. Life moved on, but the story of Grandpa's truck in the creek was far from forgotten. It had become part of the land's history, whispered among neighbors and shared as a lesson in standing firm. People started to realize something important. Sometimes, the quietest actions make the biggest impact. Grandpa didn't shout or threaten. He simply used what he had, his truck, the creek, and his knowledge of the land, to protect what was his. It was a reminder that you don't always need a loud fight to win. Sometimes, you just need to be steady and smart. The family felt a renewed pride in their home. The ranch wasn't just a place to live anymore. It was a symbol of resilience. Grandpa's actions showed that respect isn't given freely. It's earned and defended with care. The simple act of dragging his truck into the creek had changed how everyone saw the land. It was no longer just a piece of property. It was a statement. Grandpa himself didn't say much about it. For him, it was just a part of everyday life, another challenge to meet and overcome. But the younger generations in the family saw it differently. They learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean being loud or aggressive. It means being thoughtful, deliberate, and confident in your own strength. Even those outside the family started to notice the change. Some neighbors who had felt sympathy for the ranch's troubles now had a new respect for Grandpa. His quiet courage inspired others to think about their own boundaries and how they might protect them with dignity. The story spread beyond the ranch, becoming a reminder for anyone who has ever felt pushed aside or ignored. The creek, once just a peaceful part of the land, became a symbol of defense and determination. It was a place where calm met courage, where patience met action. And that combination was powerful. It reminded people that standing your ground doesn't always need to be noisy or dramatic. Sometimes, it's about knowing your place and making sure others know it too. Over time, Grandpa's truck was finally moved out of the creek. But the memory stayed strong. The truck in the creek was never about making a mess or causing trouble. It was about respect, something many people forget to ask for, and something fewer still remember to give. The family continued their work on the ranch, tending to the fields, caring for animals, and enjoying the quiet beauty of their land. But beneath the everyday tasks, there was a sense of security that hadn't been there before. The land was theirs, protected not just by fences and signs, but by a spirit of quiet strength. Grandpa's story became more than just a family tale. It became a lesson in standing up for what's important with dignity. It showed that sometimes the best way to handle a difficult situation is not with anger or loud protests, but with calm and determined action. It's about finding the right way to send a message that can't be ignored. And in a world that often rushes toward conflict and noise, that lesson feels more important than ever. It's a reminder that sometimes strength is found in stillness and power is shown through patience. Grandpa's truck in the creek was a symbol of that, a story about respect, boundaries, and the courage to protect what matters most. His story didn't just fade away after the truck was moved from the creek. In fact, it seemed to grow stronger with time. The ranch had always been more than just land to the family. It was a legacy. And Grandpa's quiet stand had added a new chapter to that legacy, one that would be remembered and passed down for years to come. What made this story special wasn't just the action itself, but the meaning behind it. The ranch had faced many challenges over the years, whether hard work and sometimes difficult neighbors. But this was different. It was about respect, about how important it is to protect your space, your peace, and your way of life. And sometimes that protection doesn't come from shouting or fighting, but from simple, deliberate choices. Grandpa's calm confidence inspired everyone around him. He didn't need to explain or justify what he'd done. The message was clear. When someone crosses a line, you stand firm, you don't back down, and you don't give up your ground. The family talked about what had happened many times after that day. They realized that standing up for yourself isn't about winning arguments or proving who's right. It's about showing you respect yourself enough to protect what belongs to you. That's a powerful lesson, especially in a world where people often let things slide to avoid conflict. At the same time, the story reminded them how important it is to respect others. The HOA cop's actions might have seemed small to him, just parking a truck, but to the family, it was an invasion. It showed how something that seems insignificant can feel huge when it disrupts your peace. Respect goes both ways, and that's something they never forgot. Word of the story spread beyond the ranch. Some people saw it as a funny tale, a truck stuck in a creek because of a parking dispute. But for those who understood, it was so much more. It was about boundaries, courage, and standing up without being loud or angry. It was about finding a way to protect your home and your dignity at the same time. The ranch itself seemed to take on a new spirit after that. The fields felt safer, the animals more at ease, and the family more connected to the land. It was as if the creek and the truck had become guardians of their space, reminding them daily that what they had was worth defending. Grandpa's actions also sparked conversations among neighbors and friends about how to handle conflicts in their own lives. Some talk about standing up quietly when faced with disrespect. Others thought about how important it is to respect others' boundaries, even when it's easy to ignore them. The story became a kind of lesson, quietly spreading a message of strength and respect. For Grandpa, it was never about being a hero or making a big deal out of things. He was just a man who loved his land and knew when to draw a line. His quiet determination showed that sometimes the strongest way to protect what matters most is with calm, steady action. That quiet strength was a reminder to everyone watching. You don't have to shout or fight to be heard. Sometimes, the best way to protect your peace is by standing your ground with confidence and patience. You don't need to escalate problems. You just need to show that you won't be pushed aside. The story also highlights something important about community and responsibility. When you live in a shared space, respect becomes even more critical. Everyone has to understand where the boundaries are and honor them. Grandpa's truck in the creek was a powerful example of what happens when those boundaries are crossed and how to respond. This story is about more than just a parking spot or a stubborn officer. It's about values, respect, courage, and the quiet power of standing firm. It's about knowing when to act and how to do it in a way that demands respect without causing chaos. And for those who live by their own rules, who protect what they love quietly but fiercely, Grandpa's story is a beacon. It's proof that strength doesn't always rule. Sometimes, it just quietly shifts the course of a creek and the course of a life.